I always thought it would be a good idea for them to know how to play poker and shoot pool and speak French and Yiddish.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Life of Dad Show. Here in the Life of Dad Show, we talk with athletes, actors, entrepreneurs, CEOs, musicians, entertainers who've all made a name for themselves, but the one thing that is most important to them is being a dad. This week's episode, we're doing part 2 of my interview with Alda. Not only do we talk about his great podcast episode on his own podcast network called Clear and Vivid, about the special MASH episode that he had with his former castmates, but we delve into the world of fatherhood. You are going to love the stories he shares. He's also a grandfather too, so we talk about being a grandfather in his world. Great guy. It was an honor to chat with him. So let's get into it. Here's my interview with the one and only Alda. Enjoy. Hey everyone, Eddy here for the Life of Dad Show and online. I'm very happy to have the one and only Alda. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me, sir. How you doing?
I'm great. Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, it's such an honor. Big fan of your work. Before we get into fatherhood, I got to say, congrats on your podcast, Clear and Vivid, coming up next week. A special MASH podcast featuring members of the legendary TV show. Talk about the process of setting this up, because obviously, you've worked with your colleagues and all that, but trying to get time and dates locked down and like the idea. Talk a little bit about how you set this up to get this done for your podcast, sir.
You're right. It was a lot of doing. We get together at least once a year to have dinner. So we're in touch by email all the time. But to get together at one time to get access to a microphone or even a telephone to get together for the same podcast took a lot of doing. And then that wouldn't be bad enough. Jamie Farr almost lost his house in the big fire in California last month. And I think everything around him was burned down and his house was saved, but he couldn't get back into it for a while. And we had to postpone the podcast. We had advertisers set up for the podcast, and then they got all confused, and they didn't. So we had it sponsored instead by the Alda Center for Communicating Science, because it really makes sense, because this podcast with the MASH guys is so about what the theme of the show is, because the theme of the podcast is relating and communicating. And I found out things about how to relate to other people while we were doing MASH. Yeah. And I never understood before. And so that's partly what we'll be talking about. But then all these memories and reminiscences and stories come back up among us, and some of which I hadn't heard before, or I just couldn't remember.
Yeah. Definitely. Kind of speaking with that, I mean, there are shows like MASH that stand the test of time. I bet you get it all the time when, fans of the show come up to see you and they'll say, oh, I'm showing my son or my daughter, and, now they're showing their grandkids. Shows like MASH go from generation to generation. In your own opinion, why do you think MASH is still popular? Because, I think a lot of people have an idea, but I'd love to hear from you. Obviously, Hawkeye Pierce himself. But why do you think MASH is still popular today as it was when it first aired?
Well, there's no doubt that we had some of the best writing around, and wonderful directors, and a cast of actors that was very skilled and very talented. But I think people don't think about one of the elements that I think was essential was that we were doing stories about people who really lived. We did many hours of research, many hundreds of pages of research, talking to the people who had lived through MASH experiences, doctors and nurses. We combed through those transcripts looking for story ideas, and we tried to be respectful of their experience. And then there was this other thing that I was telling about a minute ago, about how we learned to relate as actors and as people. But as people first, we would sit around in a circle of chairs between shots. Sometimes you have to wait an hour or two while they're lighting the next set. And instead of going back to our dressing rooms and reading a book, we sat and looked each other in the face and kidded each other mercilessly until we were laughing.
Yeah.
And laughing hard, and that opening up to one another brought us together in a way that I'd never seen before. And we would carry that right onto the set that they had finished lighting, and played the scene, but we had a connection that we wouldn't have had otherwise. We weren't just saying our lines at each other or pretending to be who we were in that situation. We were really still relating as people, and I think that showed, and I think that's one of the elements that made the show successful. When we talk about it a little bit in the get-together that we had on Clear and Vivid.
Yeah, I can't wait to listen to that. It's going to be great. And, of course, I'll put up links here at Life of Dad for people to check out the Clear and Vivid podcast that Alan runs. Here at Life of Dad, we have the segment called Life of Dad Collector of the Week, kind of showing certain dads like what they're collecting. When one guy had this whole room dedicated to MASH. And obviously there's certain, yeah, it's amazing. It's really cool. And like this guy was all in on the show. There are certain characters that people can relate to. Obviously Hawkeye Pierce was one of those characters. What did that, I mean, you've been in so many great movies, TV shows. When you look back, and obviously you had time to do that in your latest Clear and Vivid podcast with the crew from MASH, but when you look back on Hawkeye Pierce, what stands out most about that character or that experience that you'll always take away with you?
You know, it's funny. I almost always, when I act, since the time I was a very young actor, I've almost always taken away some aspect of the character that, when I played the character, represented some kind of growth for me, or some aspect that I was able to let out that I hadn't let out before. And I don't remember that happening in MASH. And the whole time I was playing MASH, I always resisted talking about the character in public. I think because I didn't want to get stuck with a definition that you could put into words. I wanted it to be a living association between me and the character. And I wanted to discover more things about the character as time went on. I didn't want to be limited by a definition I had on Monday when I might learn something on Wednesday that would broaden it. So I'm not good at talking about the character.
But that's probably one of the reasons.
You think I would be. I love to talk, but that's one subject I'm not so vocal on.
No, but the way you approach it, and especially that character, I guess that's probably why you didn't, I mean, the way it worked, the way you did it, obviously is proof in the pudding that it worked. And a lot of people gravitated toward liking Hawkeye. So thanks so much for doing that. And I'm so honored to have you talk about father. That's the cornerstone here at Life of Dad. We like to get everybody's take on fatherhood. Taking you back a little bit, but when you found out you're going to be a dad for the first time, Alan, what was kind of going through your mind, sir?
That's a hard thing to remember. You know, I was... I got married when I was 21. I think we had our first child when I was 22. I had no idea, but I was very young, and immature, and not really aware of what was going on around me as much as I am now, as you can imagine.
Sure.
But when the one moment I remember was when my wife, early one morning, she'd been pregnant for 9 months, and one morning she said, "It's coming. It's happening." And I said, "No, that's just gas. Go back to sleep." It was some kind of denial or something. I don't know. I didn't want to believe it was going to happen. But she said, no. And we got in the car, got her to the hospital, and it worked out great.
Oh, that's fantastic.
But that's all I can remember.
Oh, I love that story. Alan, I had the exact opposite. My daughter's 10. I have 2 daughters, and my oldest is 10. I remember when my wife nudged me. She goes, "I think I'm going into labor." I jumped as quick as I possibly could out of bed. I was like, I got in like a 3-point stance. Like I was playing basketball. Like, "All right, what do you need to do? What's going on?" She goes, "Well, I want to have a shower. I want to take a shower first and eat breakfast, then we'll go." I was like, "Okay," but like it was kind of a nervous wreck in a different stand. So I love it.
It's amazing you didn't put on your rubber gloves.
Right? 2 more questions before I hit you up with a Life of Dad Quick 5. And again, I'm so enjoying this conversation. Talk about some of the core values, not only that you instilled into your kids as they were growing up, but also, too, I know you got grandkids. Talk about some of the values you're looking to not only instill into your kids when they were growing up, but now with your grandkids.
I always thought it would be we had 3 daughters, and I always thought it would be a good idea for them to know how to play poker and shoot pool and speak French and Yiddish. I also thought that you don't expect these answers, but
these are great. These are fantastic.
I also thought it would be important for them to think clearly. And from the time they were, this is again my naivete as I was a young father. I started trying to teach them logic when they were about 3 or 4 years old, and they can still remember that I taught them that the first rule of logic is that a thing cannot both be and not be at the same time and in the same respect. This is when I was being taught how to think in college. That was what I learned. I got 100% in my final exam in logic, so I thought I knew something. Then I started talking to scientists, and I found out that quantum mechanics denies the first rule of logic because, I mean, this is horrible news to me.
Yeah.
And a particle of light can be both a particle and a wave at the same time. So now I've misinformed my daughters, and the whole thing has gone down the drain.
But I got to give you some props, though, because, look, you wanted them to, like, think clearly, right? I think, especially if you play poker and you play pool correctly, you don't get, overheated, or you don't stress out by what the other people are doing. You're thinking clearly, and you have a game plan no matter what everybody else is doing. So I think you had something right there. I think, subconsciously you had a great plan there.
Well, thank you for that analysis. I'll be sure to pass it on to them. By the way, they all can do all of those things, nice. So I'm happy.
There you go.
And they laugh at me when I say, "What's the first rule of logic?" They laugh at me and tell me.
And that's great to have those inside jokes as a father, and especially
Oh yeah, it's great. How old are your children now?
10 and 8, and they're just awesome. So I love them to death.
Oh, they'll in no time at all they'll be teenagers, and they won't talk to you.
I know.
But then they come back. They come back around 19 or so.
That's what I hear. So I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, but until then, their minds are controlled from outer space.
Yes, that's what I've been told too. What is one big piece of advice you'd offer to new dads who are listening to this right now? Like dads that found out they're going to be a father, or guys that found out they're going to be a father. What is one thing you'd offer to them?
I think no matter what comes up between you, the most important thing to remember is that you love them. Even when you're frustrated with them, always remember you love them. That's the only way you can teach your kids or deal with them or respond to behavior you're not happy with, if it's not in terms of the fact that you love them no matter what. You're going to be disappointed. It's not going to work.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that great piece of advice. Now we're going to end off with the Life of Dad Quick 5, just some fun, quick questions. Did you guys have a favorite family movie you all like to watch together as a family when they were in the house? Or now with your grandkids, is there a certain movie you guys like to watch together?
I don't think so. I always like to get them interested in Galaxy Quest because it makes me laugh every time I see it.
Good one. Nice. Favorite family song, or was there a band you couldn't wait to introduce your kids to when they got at the right age?
I tried to get them to listen to Mozart when we were in the car driving together, and they said, "Don't play your music, play our music."
Such a Life of Dad moment right there, no doubt. Describe the perfect family vacation. Where would it be?
For 30 years, we went to an island in the Caribbean, and that was perfect. But we went to the same place for 30 years, and it got too much of the same thing. So then we tried other islands. But, it doesn't matter. As long as we get together, we're happy. It doesn't matter.
Definitely. I totally agree on that. Best thing about being a grandfather over a dad is?
Oh, the best thing is that you're probably going to be experiencing adolescence for the last time.
Well said. And then lastly, this is probably a tough question. If it's no, don't worry about it. But was there one of the many great episodes of MASH? Did you have like a favorite one, or did one stand out for a certain reason? Whether it was a milestone episode or something that meant a lot to you while you were prepping up for that episode?
No, I get asked that a lot, but I don't have a favorite episode. I have favorite class of episodes where we told the story differently, and it was very imaginative, like the Dreams episode, or the point of view where the camera was an actor, where the dead guy got up out of his body and didn't understand that he was dead and kept trying to tell people he was still alive. It always interested everybody on the set, all the crew and everybody, whenever we were telling a really unusual story in an unusual way. And that kept us going. And I think we had sort of a deal with the audience that no matter how strange we might be one week, we'd come back and and deliver the next week.
Definitely. That you guys did, sir. Thank you so much. People, make sure you check out the Clear and Vivid podcast hosted by Alan Alda, especially the MASH episode. You're gonna love this one. And again, follow him on Twitter at Alan Alda and go to alanalda.com for everything on Alan. But Mr. Alda, thanks so much for taking the time. I appreciate the thoughts on father and, of course, the stories on MASH, sir. You continued success with everything in the future.
Thank you. It was fun talking with you. Thanks very much.
All right. Same here, sir. You take care.
Good. Thanks an awful lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening to the Life of Dad show. You know where to find us, lifeofdad.com, and on Twitter and Facebook.